Hey, this is Grant Sanderson. Welcome to Ben, and Blue. So this is a pretty fun conversation. Ben Stenhaug basically calls out me and Eder on the fact that last time all three of us were going on about how lectures are not the best use of classroom time and, what's the reason that we all do it anyway. And Eder and I make videos that are basically lectures. So how do we square that circle? And it's funny, I think we actually intended for this to be just like the first 10 or 15 minutes of the conversation. But once we actually got into it and kind of exposed some points where we disagreed, it just easily filled the hour. And before going right into it here, I actually want to ask you guys for a little bit of advice. So we're starting off the podcast, right? And it's still pretty early on. We're at episode number 3. And you never really know with these things what direction they're going to take, right? What the tone is going to be. And at the end of this recording, the three of us kind of started talking about how it felt fun and it felt good, but in a very different way from how it feels when we're just hanging out, chewing the fat. It almost felt like we were on a panel and trying to have a more structured discussion with a knowledge that people are listening to us. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's better to have a very direct front of mind awareness that we actually need to make a point out of what we're talking about. But for the sake of experiment and just to feel kind of a contrast, what we decided to do was then and there just hit record again and have an unplanned conversation about what was on the top of our minds. And that's actually going to be episode number 4. And what I would love from the listeners is if you're willing to take just a moment and give us a little feedback on what format you prefer, or where on the spectrum you would prefer us to be. I mean, no matter what, it's just going to be like the three of us talking in a pretty conversational way. But should we carry on with the momentum of episodes 2 and 3, kind of staying a little more structured, a little more focused on education? Or to what extent should we veer in the direction of episode 4, just the random conversation about what's on our minds? And you know what? If you really wanted to be helpful and give us some delicious, valuable data, here's what might actually be most helpful. Listen to the first 10 minutes of each one of them, and then before going on with either one, I want you to get back to us on maybe the subreddit and tell us which one you want to hear more of. If you do that, I would be incredibly grateful. So with that as my personal shameless request, let's go ahead and dive right in.
Okay, so last time on Ben, and Blue, we talked about this idea of active learning versus traditional lecturing. And we talked all about the inertia around the traditional lecture and how it's problematic and how much more effective active learning is. So I'm curious, guys, you guys both make YouTube videos, either on the side or for a living. And in some sense, that's a traditional lecture. So you guys on that last podcast kind of demonized the traditional lecture. But it seems like you're very into the production of something that's similar. I want to talk about that.
Well, so 100% I'm right there with you. What we make is lectures. I don't think there's any two ways around it. But what we were talking about before was much more about what's the best use of classroom time, right? And if saying lectures are not the best use of classroom time is what we all came to, that's a very different thing from saying lectures have zero value, right? I absolutely think learning happens in lectures. And it's just a matter of what makes that learning stick. What's the broader context of where that lecture fits in? If I make a 20-minute video and it is basically just me talking to someone, they are not being active in that. What learning happens or doesn't happen, that has everything to do with what they do before that 20 minutes, what they do after that 20 minutes. Are they just watching more videos? Are they like practicing problems? Was this incorporated into a class? Like all of that surrounding context feels to me like what our conversation was centered on, not, I don't think any of us would have claimed lectures are useless. I don't know. Is that what you were saying?
I don't think lectures are useless. That's certainly not the case. I think you have a 20-minute lecture. So you said it's important what they're doing before and what they're doing after. I think maybe what the most important thing is what they're doing during. Because I'm skeptical of someone just passively watching something for 20 minutes and not. I think you feel like you're learning a lot during that. I think you feel like kind of stimulated and you feel like you're experiencing some sort of education. But I'm not convinced that's leading to any sort of like long-term memory unless you're doing something else during that time. Something as simple as note-taking, something as sophisticated as some interactive experience on the computer.
So I think it depends on the goals that you have for the lecture, because your goal might not be deep learning of the content. Your goal might be coming away with the feeling like you've learned something, which kind of gives you confidence to then, engage more deeply with it. I know I enjoy watching lectures on YouTube. I spend a fair amount of time learning, quote unquote, learning things on YouTube. And I watch things and I feel like I'm learning. I feel like, wow, this really makes sense. This is cool. This is interesting. I'm engaged in that sense. If you asked me 2 days later details about a video I watched, I probably couldn't tell you any specific details about it.
Well, okay, let me ask you this, Eater. When you put together a video and you're thinking of how it's going to be structured, maybe you kind of put together a loose bullet point. I know you don't do scripts. Are you hoping that the person learns the thing? Is that what you have in your mind as you're doing it? Or are you specifically connivingly saying, like, I want to give the illusion of understanding this for that feeling of satisfaction, but where they are 2 days after the video, that's not my problem.
Honestly, it's the latter.
Really?
Yeah, which is bizarre. I mean, I hope that people come, most people, I should say, come watch the video and everything makes sense. It makes sense. Oh, I see why you're starting with this because I understand that is grounded in something I truly do know and have internalized. And then I can see the logical step from where I am to step 2, to step 3, to step 4. It all makes sense. I'm not expecting you to remember all of those steps, but I'm expecting you to walk away truly believing that it makes sense. And the place that we got to is something that you can understand because for a brief moment while you're watching the video, you did understand it. That's what I expect most people to get out of it. I don't expect them to necessarily remember any of it. Now, there are going to be a few people, particularly with my videos, who actually use it in an active way and they say, I'm going to build this project. And that's a very different sort of watching because they're going to watch a couple minutes, they're going to pause, they're going to take notes, they're going to actually, order parts and then, connect those parts and build something. And that's obviously an active learning type of thing. But the vast majority of people who watch my videos, I expect really aren't, learning in the deep way that I think we're talking about.
That makes me like sad, man. I love the active learning process. That's why I love your videos because that's what I'm imagining is someone like making a computer and just learning a ton. But you say,
but when you're watching my videos, you're not making a computer, are you?
Not at all. And I honestly don't think.
So what are you getting out of them?
I don't think I'm getting anything out of them, honestly. And I think maybe that's like what I'm saying.
You just said you enjoyed watching them.
So I'm getting enjoyment, sure.
Okay.
Like I'm getting enjoyment. And you say like you did understand for 2 minutes during the video. Like that feels like it's false. It feels like it's just you're creating an illusion that is maybe for pure enjoyment. And maybe it's super counterproductive even. I remember learning.
Wait, Stenhaug, when you say that's false, you mean in the sense that you think you understand it, but you don't? Or that if you understand it at any point, it lasts longer than those 2 minutes?
I think you understand it and you don't. I remember really wanting to get good at R. And so I look online and I enroll in some Coursera courses and I watch some people on YouTube use R. And like as they're going, it's like, that makes sense. That makes sense. And then at some point it becomes, I need to use R and do something. And I kind of have this thought of like, I put in this time by watching these videos. Like I must have learned something. And I'm literally no more proficient than I was before. I almost think the videos did me a disservice because it like led me to inaction and not actually doing active learning that would have actually made me better.
I actually look at that the other way because maybe it's because I kind of have this view of videos where I'll watch a video and come away with that sense of like, oh, I get this, or at least I got it for the couple minutes that I was watching it. And then when I try to do it, of course I hit my head against the wall because, oh, there's details that I forgot, or there's details that the video didn't go into, or I did something wrong. And so I've gone down this path that wasn't covered. But I see that as kind of looking back at the lecture or the video part of it as like, oh, okay, well, at least I know that this does make sense. This can make sense. What is it I'm missing? What I don't think is, wow, this is just too hard for me, and I have no chance of understanding this.
This is interesting to hear because I feel like whenever you talk to other educational YouTubers, there's this spectrum of how much they think their videos actually teach or how much videos in principle can actually teach. And I used to identify myself as being pretty hard on the end of like, videos is not where you learn, thinking I was kind of at the end of that spectrum. But I feel like you're a little bit farther than I am, Eater, because I do think if you have that illusion of learning, and I'm probably with you that that's kind of what we're going to create is that little illusion of learning. I don't view that as wholly separate from the learning itself. I think if you have that illusion of learning once, and then you layer it on again, maybe in a different medium, and then you layer it on again, even if none of that's active, but it's all just lecture or reading or things like that, I do think after a certain number of times, it does genuinely stick. It sticks faster if there's activity. I'll 100% line up with that if someone's there building the computer. But I don't think it's intrinsically ephemeral the way that you seem to.
So what you're getting at is the fact that if you've got a tutor or one-on-one instruction, that is always going to be more effective. And one of the things that one-on-one instruction can do, or the tutor can do, a good tutor, let's say, can do is put you in situations allow you to observe things and then point out and create insights for you, rather than if you're sort of fumbling with something, you may or may not notice what's important, whereas an instructor can kind of point out an insight and say, "Hey, that pay attention to that," or "Don't pay attention to that." And I think what you're getting at is that if you watch a video or see a lecture at the right time, when your mind is like kind of right on the cusp of getting something, the lecture can be the thing that gives you that insight that kind of puts you over the edge.
It's interesting you bring up tutoring. Can I make my horrible like sponge mold metaphor here?
Go for it.
I think I've brought this up in non-podcast conversations before. So you guys know that I tutor a little bit, right? These are some students I've had for like many years, and it's kind of fun to keep up with. So one of them, there was this time he was struggling with something, and we were having kind of a conversation outside the math itself, just talking about the tutoring process. And I said, so your brain is like a... And I don't know where I was going to finish that sentence. I can't remember to this day, but I know it wasn't what he said, because he said a sponge. And at that point, I'm like, all right, improv, yes, and let's go with that. And I wanted to co-opt his point into where I wanted to go. I'm like, yes, it is like a sponge. And I'm here and I'm pouring water into that sponge. And that's very much the relationship of tutor and tutee. And it feels great when you're the sponge and you have this water being poured in, because it's like knowledge, and that's awesome. But the illusion here is that people think the water is the learning, but the water's not the learning. The learning is the mold that grows inside the sponge, and it has to be stuff that grows from within and doesn't come from without. But I do view that water as kind of a necessary component. So outside of the metaphor, that would be just that the actual learning is when, he's sitting there solving a problem and he comes to it within his own mind. That mold grows within his own mind. And then my role is to just create an environment in which that mold is most likely to grow. And if I just pour water on and leave it for a week, it dries up and it needs to be put on there again. And if you have a regular pouring of water, like that's good for mold. If you have, just water and then nothing, you're probably not going to get as much mold. And it's a horrible metaphor, but the more I think about it, I like it, just because the feeling of water is the good one. That's what we all like, and that's what we kind of think of as the sponge growing. But the uncomfortable one is...
But too much water isn't going to work. You can't just drop the sponge in a lake and get mold.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
So Grant, let me ask you a question to make this maybe more concrete. So this is researchable, right? Like you're saying that you're providing water and that's going to turn into mold. You think someone that watches your linear algebra series before taking a college course, maybe they watch it a week before taking the college course, you think they have like measurably different outcomes than someone that doesn't?
I hope to do that measurement one day. And even though, like I said, I view myself on the end of the spectrum of like, you don't really learn from videos. And I don't think this is egoistic. I would say, yeah, I do think they perform better in that linear algebra class. And specifically, it's because with that series, it's about here's a visual that you can have in mind when you see these terms. And I think that affects the relationship you have when you hear those terms on a static Blackboard setting, right? If you've come to think of, matrices as linear transformations and you've got this motion involved, when the prof is up there and he's writing that matrix on the board, you have something a little bit more dynamic happening in your head than if it was purely viewed as a grid of numbers. And I think it's all those little times of reinforcing it that was seeded by the series, at least that's my hope, that makes it that, you would perform better. I don't think it's that the only learning that happened is in the 2 hours of the series or so. It's that reinforcement that recapitulates this image in the mind. So I'm an optimist in that way.
Grant, that's a really strong answer to the question we asked last podcast, which is why are people lecturing? And I think the answer you're giving is the answer that most teachers arrive at, which is, well, okay, maybe it's not the most effective thing, or maybe you're not going to remember everything I tell you, but I'm going to seed some things in your mind so that when you actually dive in, roll up your sleeves, and start solving problems, you're going to remember some of the things that I told you in this lecture, and it's going to help you.
I agree with that. And in fact, I mean, you remember what Stenhaug said about teaching trigonometry and initially doing it without even showing people SOHCAHTOA, but the right way to blend in like an active learning setting, like the exposition happens somewhere, right? We'd all agree that it happens somewhere. And the question is just where.
Whoa. Yeah. So we need to separate these things though. Because what I asked you the question, Grant, was like, how long is your linear algebra series? It's like if I watch all of it in total.
Like 2.5 hours if you were just binging the thing.
So I binge that thing, or maybe I watch it over a week and it's not that much time, a week or two before I take the college course. And then I go and I take kind of the general college course where it's a little boring and the teachers at the blackboard and whatever. And you're kind of saying like, oh, in my mind is going to be Grant's like incredible visual depiction of some concept. And that's going to like help me understand it more deeply. I don't at all trust that a student or myself would like be able to grab that specific image connected to that term from all of your video and bring it into my mind in that lecture in a way that like would it all help me.
But Grant, would you recommend binging? I mean, would you recommend taking the sponge and plunging it into a lake for 2.5 hours and then pulling it out and letting it sit for the rest of the semester? Or would you recommend maybe putting a little bit of water on it every week?
First, I love that you're running with my metaphor. Second, no, I wouldn't recommend the binging. Like, I do think if it was a perfect world, it would be that you watch a video, you do exercises. You watch a video, you do exercises. Like, I fully acknowledge that's the perfect world. And
YouTube
Stenhaug,
is never going to recommend
to
that.
your point about like, do I think they're conjuring up all of the complexity that might go with those things on top of what's already maybe like a bit of a confusing lecture? I want to go back on myself and correct. I don't think it's so much in the lecture itself that this is happening. That's probably the picture I painted before, but I'd want to go back on that. It's relevant in the homework, right? I do think that the times when it would be most helpful is when you are grappling with things. And that's one point I think we all agree on is central to the learning, and everything else is this peripheral machine outside of it. But central to the learning is that moment when you're the student, you have the problem in front of you and you're grappling with it. How you get to that problem, who set up that problem, what's in your mind before that problem, all of that is like interesting things to address. But I think everything should center around that. And like the question that I would ask is, if I like view my videos as helpful, where in that machine do they fit?
And I correct me if I'm wrong, but my perception of your typical watcher is not someone using it while like grappling with a homework or something. I'm
No.
imagining someone watching it on Saturday morning and being like, man, those are some cool animations. That makes a lot of sense. That's really well said. This is like the best explanation I've ever heard. And like, that's cool. And I think that's valuable in itself. I'm just not buying that it's like changing real world outcomes.
I would optimistically say that it's 1% of the views you see on a video that translate to people for whom that video was a part of this actual learning machine. And that's still inspiring to me. I think that's still a meaningful number.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. I mean, I feel like I'm coming across as kind of harsh in taking a stance. You guys both make incredible videos. Don't get me wrong. And if there is enjoyment coming out of it,
and we're not fishing, by the way. You don't have to. You don't have to. Say
I mean,
let
me just dot my T's and cross my I's there. I want to go back to something. So, Eater, you talked about the guy or the girl that's making the computer while watching your video. You imagine that's some percent of your audience?
Well, I didn't expect that, to be honest. I mean, I was even more pessimistic than maybe I should have been, but that's actually happening. And, people are sending pictures and making their own videos talking about that they've done the project, and they're talking in the comments on the videos and exchanging tips and advice and all the rest. So that's happening. Yeah, it's exciting.
That's pure magic. Like if I'm critical of this person just passively watching something, like that is amazing.
Eater, you say you didn't necessarily anticipate that. What was in your mind when you started the channel? What was the best case outcome for how it touched the world?
That's a good question. I mean, there was a big part of it of I just kind of wanted to do this project and share it.
Well, let's dig in on that. I mean, was it because it's something that you know and it's very pleasing to describe things that you know? Was it like the thought of like, the young student out there who might take more courses in electrical engineering and get inspired in that way?
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question because I think there was this belief that I had when I was a kid. I don't know, high school age, let's say. And this was early 90s. Computers were much simpler and easier to understand back then. And I had this probably somewhat delusional belief that I kind of understood how everything worked inside the computer. Looking back now, that probably isn't completely true, but I had a pretty good idea. And I, for some, again, delusional, perhaps, reason, believed that I was able to build a computer from scratch if I wanted to, because I felt like I had some grasp of all of the pieces. But I never actually got to do that. And so it was sort of this childhood desire of like, man, I'd really like to build a computer from scratch. And then when I did that, I think what I was trying to share in walking through that is kind of that same belief that I had when I was younger, because that was something that kind of was motivating to me. That for whatever reason, I had assembled enough knowledge that I was at least able to kind of trick myself into thinking, hey, I have this skill, or I have this knowledge, I have this ability to do this thing. Haven't done it, but I believe I could. And I found that to be a helpful, motivating thing that, especially when I was struggling in school, to at least have this belief about myself that, yeah, I'm struggling in school, but that's actually not a reflection of me. That's a reflection on the system.
Okay, so is it fair to say that you, in like publicizing this project, rather than just thinking it like you're building a computer in your garage, hoped to make it so that others had that same sensation that you did as a student of, I know how a computer works. If I wanted to, I could build it.
I think that's it. I think that's it. Because looking back at kind of where I was when I was in high school, I was not a great student. I was struggling. And I always felt like there was a disconnect because I never believed that I was not smart enough to be successful in school. Just the material in school didn't connect to me. And and so the grades and all the rest that I got were bad. I didn't get great grades. I guess later in life, I realized that some of these other skills that I had, some of these other interests, passions that I had, actually turned into something that turned into a successful career for me.
Okay, so insofar as that's true, there's an inspiring aspect about that, by the way. Just, I don't know, I love that story. But insofar as what was giving you the confidence there was an actual knowledge of the computer.
I don't know.
Maybe there was some illusion about how much of it, but there was actual knowledge about how a computer worked, right?
There was some, yeah. I mean, I was building hardware that connected to the computer and cards that would plug into the computer and that sort of thing. I was building pieces, so there was some actual knowledge. Yeah.
So it must be the case that if part of your goal was to give this sensation to another human out there, that you hoped they would actually get that knowledge, right? That they would come away not just with the illusion of the knowledge, because you can't feel that confidence if it was just the illusion of the knowledge, because it wouldn't last more than a couple days. There must have been a part of you
Yeah,
that
but
thought like these videos are going to give people a genuine feel for how a computer works. No?
a feel for it, yeah, because I mean, I think I did have a combination of the illusion of the knowledge as well as some knowledge. But I think if 10th grade me sat down and tried to build a computer, I would have obviously learned a lot more than what I actually knew at the time, actually going through those steps.
Sure, sure. I mean, I guess part of maybe what we're landing on here is the relevant knowledge that's being taught or conveyed. Like it doesn't have to be 100%. And maybe we'd even all agree it can't be. It fundamentally can't be, right? No one's going to know how a computer works just by watching your videos. But maybe the activation energy to even engaging with it enough to get to that active point. Like, you're not going to try to start to build a computer unless a little part of you thinks that you're going to be able to figure it out. Maybe what the videos teach, what we can optimistically say, this is what people will learn, and this is the knowledge we're putting in people's heads, is that activation energy, right? That requires actual knowledge. It's not mere inspiration. It is actual, like you have to get some facts in that head. Do you think that's fair?
I think so. Yeah.
I like that phrasing. I feel more comfortable with that phrasing. You have some, just to say it back to you. So you have some students or some people that would think they could never build a computer. They could never possibly understand what a computer looks like. You have other students that think I could never understand linear algebra. I've seen it. It seems so scary and complex. And you guys are suggesting that you're making videos and content that maybe I'm not going to walk away knowing everything, but I'm going to walk away knowing enough to feel like, oh, this is learnable, and it's going to like activate me to go seek other learning experiences that are maybe going to lead to more measurable pre to post test gains in that domain.
And importantly, I would say, I think there's a divide in educational videos. Those where the value they're adding is inspiration, and those where the value they're adding is clarity, right? And there's a whole category of educational channels where, the viewer gets there and they're showing some cool science thing maybe, and they come out with like, yeah, science is awesome, right? Like flames in 0G are spherical. How cool is that? That's not like, here's a concept I was exposed to by some other means, but seemed confusing. And then it like walked through very clearly. And so I do want to draw the divide. I'm not claiming like we are about the inspiration. That's a valuable thing, maybe. But I think Eater and I both would fall into, if people find value from the channels, it's not, this most like eye-catching, you will be inspired about the awesomeness of math, the awesomeness of computer science. Instead, the hope that I assume each of us has here is that someone comes out thinking, oh, that was clear. That was something that previously I thought might be opaque, but that was clear. The whole point here is just that there is a whole type of inspiration that is the clarity, that is that, and it's not just feeling. I'm going to make the claim that it is that 20% gain in knowledge of activation energy needed to move any further.
So almost like with the linear algebra, for example, you might, if you don't know anything about linear algebra, other than it's this advanced college course that maybe, I didn't take or have yet to take or, whatever, if you don't know anything about it beyond that it's this hard thing, you see all this symbols and notation, and it's like, what is this linear algebra thing? It seems complex. Your videos at least draw a box around it and say, this is linear algebra. These are the
Yeah.
extents of it. This is the domain. This is what it is. Inside this box are the things that if you learn these things, then you'll know linear algebra. It makes it a tractable thing. It's like, oh, that's what linear algebra is. That's the kind of problems it can solve. That's good to know. If I ever need to solve some of those problems, I know I can learn linear algebra.
And in particular, what I like think a funny consequence of this is, I don't know if you have this either, tell me, but I have a tendency to be comfortable lying about how simple something is, right? Like if there's more complexity, rather than being like, ah, and this gets really like hairy under the hood when you look deeper into it, just don't even mention that and make a field seem a little bit simpler than it actually is.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do that. And the computer that I built is taking all kinds of weird shortcuts that if you actually do build it, you realize it works, of course, because it works. But you might realize, oh, there's some kind of shortcuts here. There's some weird current drops that only sort of work by accident.
Mm. That's I didn't know that.
And that is in part just to make it simpler. And I talk about them occasionally for folks who are wondering. But if you're not wondering because you don't know to wonder, then you'd miss it. And that's fine.
And I think some people would complain about that though, right? They'd be like, ah, you should have at least mentioned that things do get more complicated, or you shouldn't have lied and made it seem simpler than it was. But
Yeah, and yeah, that comes up for me, and yeah, people ask questions and things like, "Well, wait, why is this?" And
So I love this because I could actually literally feel my view developing as we're talking.
Hmm.
I think what I'm concerned with is one particular case, and I'm afraid it's a decent percentage of your guys' populations. And her method of learning that is watching your videos, Grant, and then she's not actually learning, though she thinks she is, and she's going to run into something downstream where
Mhm.
she's going to like kind of run into this roadblock and have to realize like, oh, I watched those YouTube videos and it made sense then, but I didn't gain anything and I'm kind of worse for it almost.
Well, you hit an interesting catch 22, I guess, which is if what you want is this illusion of learning, then you can't tell them that it's an illusion. Otherwise, you break the illusion. But if you actually want to, inspire by giving the sense that it is this finite, understandable box, then the illusion has to be there. I try to emphasize my view that the videos are not enough alone, that no matter what, this is not enough in its own case. And hopefully that can make any gaps that like people find, or that they have that sense of, oh, I really thought I knew what this meant, but now I'm not able to answer questions with it. It feels a little bit, I don't want to feel like I was betraying them in any way, or I don't want them to feel like I was betraying them. So that the picture you paint, I think that would be a majority if I didn't make explicit mentions that like I don't think that this is sufficient. Um, so my own hope is just that saying that out loud solves the problem. Maybe that's a cop out. I don't know.
No, I think that's legitimate. And then the follow on to that is maybe just frustration in general that I think the experience that guy or girl should be able to have just doesn't exist. Like what you want is someone to explain something for 2 to 3 minutes, show a beautiful image that the student can get, give them some interactive experience that they do for a couple of minutes. If they make a misconception, have it correct them in some useful way, give them more information, let them play around in a world. And it's like this back and forth online experience that like I think would really lead to learning. And Khan Academy does it sometimes in some places, but I don't think as well as I would imagine in 2017 that experience isn't available. And that frustrates me, I think.
almost what you're getting at is the fact that learning is hard and it's a struggle. And to some degree, I would posit that that's unavoidable.
Would you say the problem is that not enough people acknowledge the necessary hardness of learning?
Oh, definitely.
Because it seems like what a lot of people want, they're trolling around YouTube and they're like into education and they're like going to lectures. They want to be Neo from the Matrix, plugging in their brain to some system so that 30 seconds later they come out saying like, I know Kung Fu, or like, I know quantum physics, right? And I feel like if you actually sat down with them and you just gave them a one question survey, is learning hard? Every one of them says yes. So it's hard for me to see like, where's the difference between this hope of being able to be Neo and the conscious acknowledgement that I would claim most people would give that like learning is actually hard.
I think it's people don't want to do hard things.
I guess what I'm trying to get at, is it the case that they know learning is hard and they're just like, la, 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 I don't want to think about that. Hopefully this lecture won't be too hard.
Well, you're almost getting to a question of mindset. Learning is hard.
Mm-hmm.
And to be a good learner and to learn, you've got to kind of embrace that and accept that and bear it and do the hard thing and appreciate and just have it as part of your internal values that you know that doing this hard thing is going to reward you
Hmm.
because learning things is rewarding, even though it's hard work. And I think the problem is that if you don't have that value structure, if you haven't internalized that, you don't have that mindset of learning is hard, but I'm doing it anyway because I value it. If you don't have that mindset, if you don't come in with that, then you're looking for shortcuts.
Okay, so this is, I think you raise, maybe it's the same catch 22 as earlier, but at the very least something similar. Am I right in saying that you don't want to convey to people that learning how to build a computer is hard, that that's not something you want them coming away with?
Yeah, interesting question.
Right, you see what I'm saying, right? Like, you have to make a choice. Either you're okay with them feeling like building a computer is hard, or you want to give them this illusion that building a computer is easy, or maybe building a computer is doable. But it feels like there's this exclusion. You can't have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, I think what you're looking for is something that you want to entice people. You want to show them the reward, right? You want to show them that there's a reward to learning it because yes, learning is hard. There's a high cost, but it's also fun and rewarding and exhilarating and exciting and all these other things. And I want to show that so that people are willing to bear that cost.
The way you phrase it there, like you want to give them a taste, I like that. Because if that sense of when you actually grapple with, understand something, right? Like you've done the problems, you grappled it, you built the computer, you did the shortcuts, like everything that goes into actual learning, that bit of satisfaction, insofar as that might be like a chemical thing, let's imagine you could distill it into a drug and just inject it into someone. It's almost like what we want to do is inject that feeling into someone, even though it didn't come with all of the genuine learning, and be like, see, that's the end point. But at the same time, not like, I don't know, how do you do that without lying to them about the fact that it will be difficult?
I don't know if you have to. I mean, I think it's fine to say, if you really want to learn this, it's going to be hard. Yeah, I don't know. That's tough because I mean, obviously, if you're watching my videos, I make it look easy. Or at least I try to.
And also, that kind of cuts against anything else that like you or I choose to explain. When we're structuring that explanation, we know it's not sufficient to just tell, right? You got to show it. You don't just like tell the thing, and that's what constitutes a good explanation. If that's an explanation of how basic circuit elements can come together to create like an adder or whatever it might be. But if one of the things we want to convey is that learning is hard, you can't just say it. You can't just, I think that is a cop out on my part, right? You can't just tell them, oh, this is not enough. Oh, this will be harder in some way. You got to show it if that's something you genuinely want to communicate.
Yeah. So one thing I do is I don't edit out mistakes.
That's a great point.
I edit out some mistakes, but I keep in the mistakes that flow well, I guess. I don't, there's some obviously mistakes that take hours to troubleshoot or something. I'm not going to leave that in,
That's a crazy good
but
comeback.
yeah, there are some mistakes that I don't edit out. And I think it's important for people to see that even though it seems like I know what I'm doing, I'm making mistakes. And it's not always obvious to me when I make that mistake what's going on. And so, I pull out the multimeter, I start measuring voltages, I test and see, well, what's going on here? What could it be? It could be this, it could be that. Oh, I see. I forgot this,
Mhm.
little silly thing.
Let me ask you this, at the risk of derailing things a little bit further, Stenhaug, I know you might want to get back to what the original question was, but when you read comments that address, I'm sure there are comments about the fact that you like leave mistakes in and don't edit them out. Is the general theme of them that they like that, or that they kind of wish that you would just cut that out and keep it a nice, clean, crisp description?
I think they've universally been, oh, I love it that you leave these mistakes in.
Hmm.
It's humanizing, I think.
Because you'll read comments about like Khan Academy, for example, that feel like Sal sometimes leaves things a little too unedited. That while there is value in
Khan
keeping,
Academy has a much bigger audience than I do. So maybe that's
yeah,
it.
so like the proportions might still be an overwhelming majority, but it's easier to see an absolute number of dissenters.
Maybe I don't know.
So let me bring us back to the question. I actually strongly disagree with you guys both. I think learning requires focus, but I don't think it has to be hard. The majority of learning that I see, it's like there's way too much wasted time. There's this girl I'm teaching R to right now, and she spent like 2 hours because she didn't like know to like how to open the program, and she was confused. She was like in the terminal and she like didn't know what to do, and that's just completely wasted time, and it's hard and frustrating, and instilling in her a mindset of like perseverance is great. But I think like her spending all of that time is a result just of like poor resources. And I think generally, like, I'm hoping our educational content and technology can get to the point where like that those experiences are like a much, much, much smaller percentage of the experience of learning.
But I would push back a bit on that just as a professional software engineer. There are times when I spend several hours beating my head against something that was really obvious in hindsight. So that's a reality. Is it okay to expose someone to that in the learning environment too? Or do you create this artificial environment where everything just magically works the first time and everything is clear and follows and is easy, and then you are thrust into sort of the real world and it's like, wait, this isn't working now, and you're not prepared to deal with that. I think that is a valuable part of learning.
All right, Stenhaug, I've got a very concrete thing that we can look at to assess whether or not learning has to be hard. Let's say you're a middle school geometry student and you're learning about proofs, and in particular, like a proof of the Pythagorean theorem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the goal of this lesson is to have a knowledge about what mathematical proofs are and what they entail. And this is kind of the catalyst for that. Now, one possible lesson is that you walk through a very clear description of each step in one of the many, many, many clever proofs of this theorem that there are, right? It's you move the triangles around and you see what a squared looks like and what b squared looks like, and you rearrange stuff and you see c squared in there.
And the teacher's walking through this?
Maybe it's the teacher walking through. Maybe you're doing an interactive thing online. Maybe you're answering like really well-crafted guided questions.
Mm-hmm.
Point is, you're going through some kind of learning experience and it feels easy because each step makes sense. Okay. And you can come out of that. And I think with like a well-crafted, especially if it was like problem-driven experience, you might even come away remembering that proof very well. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe even a couple months later, being able to recall it. Now, that experience of not just learning what that sequence of steps is, but even being able to remember it and having it stick with you, that's very, very different from finding a proof of that theorem on your own, because there's just this whole category of choices you can make. You're sitting there with like a blank piece of paper and a right triangle sitting on it. You're like, what do I do next? What lines do I draw? There's so many possibilities. And you just have to be willing to explore, and you're going to run into wrong corners. And if the overarching lesson of this is not, hey, here's a specific proof of the Pythagorean theorem, but it's supposed to be about proofs in general, you have to have some kind of exposure to the sensation that you will go down wrong paths. You will try something, you will draw some line, you will try to connect two things, and it will fail for you. And if you only come away with the easy learning sequence, even if it was a very active environment where you were learning and it felt easy, I don't think you get that lesson. I don't think you come out understanding that a core part of finding a proof in math is to just be in this sea of infinite possible options and run into walls a whole bunch, trying to get a feel for which directions are more likely to yield fruit and which ones are more likely to be the dead ends. You know what I'm saying?
So I feel like I've seen. So A is the kind of my dream, this kind of guided experience, and then B is this kind of constructivist, open experience where the students kind of constructing knowledge on their own, right?
Okay.
I feel like I've seen both done like numerous times in classrooms, and they both like usually don't work, and for different reasons. A doesn't work because it ends up being too passive. It's not this kind of experience where it's active enough. The students just kind of watching and really not retaining anything. And then B, students just end up just playing with triangles. They're like kind of write some stuff down. They don't ever actually get to the end point. I think my dream is actually both. I think it's A's done really well a couple of times. Students get a feel for the kind of logic of a proof by having this interactive experience. And then they go to B, and maybe it's a different proof that they're trying to prove, but they kind of have some parameters of like what a proof would look like and how to use the logic. And yeah, they're going to struggle in that experience for sure, but they shouldn't have this experience of just like sheer like, holy crap, I have no idea where to get started. And I don't even know like where to begin at all. I don't think I think there's just too much wheel spinning that can happen if you go straight to B.
So are you saying A is almost like a traditional lecture in that sense?
I think A is wrongly done as a traditional lecture. A happens all the time. Like every teacher not every teacher, that's way overstated, but a lot of teachers like walk through proofs and like all the logic makes sense. And then the students either remember them or don't do anything. But it does not have to be a traditional lecture at all. It shouldn't be at all. You should have self-explanation questions. You should be asking questions. You should be having students guess what would come next, which logic piece makes sense. But it shouldn't be a traditional lecture at all, I don't think.
So, and Eater, cutting back to like the response that you initially gave of as a software engineer, you have this sensation all the time of things being harder than they needed to be in hindsight. What's your take on the right way to prepare a future software engineer for that inevitable component of the career as it relates to, Stenhaug's method A, method B, mix of the two?
I think it's being explicit with students as they're learning that this is a natural part of even, a professional who's been doing this for many years. And I think that's, to get back to what I was talking about showing mistakes in my videos, I think that's part of what I'm trying to communicate there is that, even someone who's quote unquote an expert here makes mistakes or goes down a wrong path, and that's okay. Because I think there is this expectation, I don't know where it comes from, that if I know how to do this, it's going to be easy. And so when it's hard, that means I don't know how to do it, or I'm not doing it right, or I'm not doing it well, or I haven't mastered this. When in fact, the reality is many complex things, even once you've mastered them to any measurable degree, if you're kind of operating at a high level, you're going to still be struggling from time to time. And that's okay. That is a natural part of any complex task.
And would you say that kind of this teach by example of like you are seeing the expert, whether that's you on the YouTube screen or if that's the teacher up in front, like making mistakes and grappling with them, is that kind of the right way to go about it?
That's one way to go about it. I think you need to do more than that.
Because what's interesting then is that would contradict our whole last episode where that's a type of lecturing. It is, a subset of traditional lectures to be like those where you're comfortable making mistakes and addressing them and debugging them in front of the whole class. That would have to be in a lecture format. That couldn't be that, everyone's sitting there in the groups of 4 working through things on their own active tables, right?
Well, I think that's one way of teaching that, but I don't think it's certainly not sufficient. It may not even be necessary, but it's definitely not sufficient in terms of you also need to coach students because you're going to see students who are beating their head against their wall and they're struggling. And, especially if they're new to something, they want to quit, they want to give up. And that's where a teacher can be really helpful at stepping in and saying, yeah, no, this is normal. This is okay. Or, yeah, you're kind of on a learning plateau. That's okay.
Hmm.
And even just the phrase learning plateau, sort of normalizes it as though like, oh, my learning might plateau. That's a thing.
Yeah, it's funny. Like even just as you said those words, like in my mind, like I had this sense of reassurance, I guess. Just it has a word for it.
Yeah. And so this feeling I'm having of like I haven't made progress in a couple days. Yeah, that's okay. That's normal. Like telling people that, being explicit about that is important too.
So if having a word helps prove points, the word in my mind is productive struggle. And I'm afraid, Eater, you're describing some experiences that don't seem like productive struggle to me. They seem like they're just kind of a waste of time. And I totally buy the value of having someone have an experience that's really, really, really difficult and building mindset and building perseverance. But I don't think you want that every single time a student's learning something. And I'm afraid we're kind of advocating for unproductive struggle as a result, maybe.
Well, I'm not sure that's fair, Stenhaug, because you bring up this image of girl learning R, spending 2 hours just trying to like get the software to work appropriately before any kind of productive struggle.
Mm-hmm.
But if our claim is just that learning is hard, that struggles will exist, that's an existential claim that there will be some kind of struggle. And we're not saying all struggles are learning, right? It's like learning is struggling, but struggling is not learning.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is I see too much struggle in most people's learning experiences. And I'm not willing to write them all off, all of that struggle as just like a necessary component. I think a lot of that is on the responsibility of the teacher or the designer of the curriculum. Like there's places people get stuck that they're just like not getting stuck for a reason. They're not benefiting from getting stuck. It's just like the oversight of whatever content they're using.
Would you say that there exists like a path to genuinely understanding? Let's take R, right? You are learning how to be fluent with R and do the data analysis you need to. Is there a path to getting to that point that perfectly crafted feels easy the entire way?
No. Well, no, probably not. But I think most people, it's not going to feel easy the entire way, but I think most people have an experience where it feels hard most of the way. And I think it can feel easy most of the way and hard in
I'm
spots.
probably with you there, that there exist struggles in the existing learning processes that don't have to be there, that are like artificial components.
Hmm.
But that's a very different thing from rejecting the premise that struggle is necessary.
Yeah, and I don't want to be mistaken as saying that struggle is completely unnecessary. I just think most people's educational experiences involve far too much of it.
Okay.
So would you so maybe another way to think of it is it ought to be more like a video game where there are going to be parts that are hard. You're going to have to, beat a boss from time to time.
Hmm.
But there's also going to be you're going to get rewarded. Once you get past a difficult boss, there's a stretch of the game that's kind of easy, and you get to collect lots of things, and it feels like there's a little bit less pressure on you. But eventually it's going to get hard again, and you're going to have to tackle an even harder boss.
Yeah.
No, I love that metaphor. I think that's
Yeah, I think
nail on
that's
the
really
head right
good.
there.
Now, also, we should be giving students experiences where they feel completely overwhelmed and they feel like they're just completely struggling. And that can be for the sake of learning, but I think that's almost more for the sake of mindset building. But maybe that's a separate conversation.
I'm not sure are you saying that separate conversation would be that state is necessary of feeling overwhelmed, or that's something that comes about more often than it needs to?
Well, how do you create perseverance mindsets? What kind of experiences lead to that? How do you help students engage with those? I think like that's not something you want every time a student's learning something new, but I think it is something that you want students to experience over the course of their education.
That would be an entirely good episode all of its own. Like that.
Like that's totally sad. That's why I paused. I was like, maybe that's separate. But I'm just granting. I think Eder was advocating for like struggle as being important because you're going to encounter it in your job. You're going to encounter it in other places in life. And I want to acknowledge that's 100% true. I just think there's also a place for purposefully crafting experiences that build directly on that and not always having it just be a byproduct of the struggle that comes from learning.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with both of those, and I think that was kind of what I meant to suggest is that there is this purposeful struggle that if you're learning, you need to struggle to learn. Like that's an intrinsic part of learning. Is that learning is hard? You need to struggle, and the struggle is not only mindset. It's not only this learning this grit because you're going to get stuck in the real world. That is a component, but you might actually come into a course already having that mindset. And so it's actually not important in that course for you to experience that purposeless struggle, I guess. But that doesn't mean that you won't encounter struggle during that course. You'll have to, because in order to truly learn, you're going to have to kind of beat your head against the wall and struggle with something that's new to you so that you can kind of integrate it into your view of the world.
I might be switching sides a little bit here, at least for the sake of devil's advocacy. I want to switch teams to Stenhaug,
Team Stenhaug?
where I'm trying to map this to other non-technical, or like the kind of things that you learn that aren't necessarily just in school themselves, right? Like cooking or driving or something like that. And I'm trying to think like, is it strictly necessary that if you're going to learn how to cook, if you're going to be able to be a human who can make meals for themselves that like taste good, do you have to struggle? Do there have to be times when like there's absolute chaos in the kitchen and you are coming up against this wall and it's really testing your grit and like building that muscle? Or could you just take a cooking class and like learn a couple recipes and a couple principles and have it feel easy the whole time? And I feel like in that context, it totally could. And in the context of like driving, I don't know that you necessarily have to be in, experience a lot of dangerous circumstances where you're on the brink of an accident and you barely pull away, or maybe you don't and you experience the accident. I don't think those are necessary for being a safe driver. So I wonder how much that necessarily pops on over into things like math and science and the stuff that is traditionally, in the K-12 curriculum.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that, because I think even something like cooking, you are inevitably going to make mistakes. You
You do?
might go and take a cooking class and they might show you, very basic, like do this, do this, do this, and you'll get this meal. At some point, though, and perhaps you've learned something, and perhaps you've learned something at a very basic level. You know how to boil a pot of water and put an egg in it and get a hard boiled egg. I don't know. Um, maybe something a little more complex than that.
Sure. No. That's the key example. Make sure you know how to hard boil eggs, and then you're coming out all just fine in life. Breakfast every morning, most important meal of the day.
Yeah, so you've learned how to do a few things. At some point, you're gonna say, okay, I kind of have this cooking thing down. I'm feeling pretty confident. I know how to set the settings on my stove. I know how to like take a large vegetable and make it into small parts.
Just side note here, how much do you know about cooking, Eater? This is fun to hear you come up with examples of the skills involved.
We should, Eater and I should have a cooking cook-off. That'd be hilarious.
I'm not prepared to admit how much I know. But anyway, perhaps the listeners can listen to this and guess. I don't know. But
Anyway, sorry, continue.
but suppose you go to this cooking class and you've learned all these things. Then you come home and you're like, okay, I can make some things. Maybe you do make some things, and so your confidence is like, yeah, I've able to go through the steps that I learned in this class, and make the meals that they taught me how to make in this class. I guess if that's all you want to do, maybe that's okay, and maybe you'll never make a mistake, and you will always get an edible meal as a result. But at some point, you might say, "Hey, I know how to cook. I'm a cook now, so I'm going to pull out this cookbook and I'm going to follow this recipe. And there's going to be some technique in that recipe that you've never seen before, and you're not going to know that you never saw it because the cookbook doesn't say this is a technique that's called this, and it's not on the list of techniques that you've learned." Uh, and so you're going to follow the instructions in the cookbook, but the cookbook isn't going to explain the technique fully. It's just going to say, you know, put this in the pan and do this and that,
Yeah,
and it's
it's
not going to. And there's going to be some aspect of it that you missed, and you're going to burn something.
it's gonna be sitting there. It's like separate the egg whites and the egg yolks, and you're like, all right. So I assume I hard boil it beforehand, and then I crush them
Right.
out.
So you're going to make some mistake, and you're going to end up with like kind of a crappy meal, or something's just going to be a complete disaster, and you're going to totally mess something up, and it's going to be inedible, or it's going to like something's not going to come together, or it's just going to be this blob of food parts on a plate that's barely edible.
Which, by the way, is most of my dinners. But continue.
At that point, you've struggled, I suppose, especially if you eat the thing, but you're probably learning something as well, because assuming you have the right mindset, you're going to look back at that and say, wow, where did that go wrong? And you might just say,
So it sounds like you're cutting into the point of adaptability. That if you have a struggle-less learning sequence, you're coming out unable to adapt to different circumstances within that same domain. Is that fair?
that's fair. Yeah, I guess maybe to put it a lot more simply, there are the lower levels of learning. So sort of the knowledge level of Bloom's taxonomy, if you want to get all technical about it, just sort of the being able to repeat back the rote memorization, that sort of thing. You can learn that without struggling, I guess, especially if you're good at memorizing things, following instructions, that sort of thing. You can kind of get there. But then, yeah, the adaptability, the synthesis, that type of stuff, it becomes like at some point you're going to have to struggle if you really want to truly master something.
I'm not so sure there's necessarily a distinction. Because if it's the case, you're like taking a cooking class that's just showing you how to make vegetables smaller and like how to hard boil an egg. Sure, gotcha. But let's say it's you're like growing up in Italy and you have like this Italian mom who's got not just a bunch of recipes, but like a feel for what makes a good sauce. And like as you're raised, she's kind of showing you like, if you I don't know anything about cooking either, so this is probably the worst topic to have chosen. But she's like, if you notice this color in the sauce, that means you need to add a little bit more salt. And like all through your life, she's just giving you these little tips on here and little tips over there. And in a sense, like what she's teaching you are the bits of information that constitute adaptability. Like, it's information just like anything else. And rather than just teaching you that bottom layer of Bloom's taxonomy, who's to say you can't just not jump straight into, but that you can't make those middle layers as easy as the bottom layers can be, and teach that adaptability such that when you're grown up and out of the home and you have all of those like experiences with your Italian mother under your belt and you open up a recipe, even if it's something you've never seen before, you see the color of the sauce and you need to add a little more salt even though that wasn't mentioned in the recipe, and all of those good little things. So I'm not convinced that those other layers of what we consider more deep learning or like higher up on Bloom's taxonomy or something that's more adaptable, whatever you want to call it, I'm not so sure that I'm convinced that those require struggle, even though it can be the case that like struggle gets you there.
I still question what's going to happen when you actually get in the kitchen. Because are you watching your grandmother and sort of listening to her explain these things, or are you participating? Are you actually cooking and she's telling you what to do? Because I can imagine, yeah, you grow up watching her, and she puts she makes the vegetables smaller. She puts them in the saute pan, and a minute or two in, she grabs the handle of the saute pan and flips it, and the vegetables flip up and turn over and land back on the other side. And you're like, okay, that looks easy enough. But boy, the first time you try to do that, you're going to have vegetables all over the floor.
Maybe not. I think if you ease into it, the reason I brought up driving as a separate example is just you don't have to have a crash to learn how to drive safely. Or, if you're like as society coming up with ways to like build rockets, you want to do everything you can that rocket failures are not a necessary component getting a new model out there. I don't want to mix too many metaphors, but just on like the driving one, I think you can start to give people a little bit of a feel and let them take the handle, let them not. And actually, let me back up. Not driving. I think learning how to fly a plane doesn't require crashing. This is something you must agree with, right?
That is true.
When you learned how to fly a plane, I'm not going to say every part of it was easy, but do you think that you had to come across struggles analogous to the kind that we're sort of describing for math learning or for, cooking learning in that metaphor or what it might be?
Yes, absolutely.
So at some point though, like it's a tough balance because the instructor can't let you mess up so much that you crash the plane, right?
Right.
So there's a line to how much struggle is allowable to exist in this context, right?
Yeah, obviously you have to fly safely. You can't crash the plane, of course. You also can't make bad decisions. If I come to the airport and the winds are blowing 30 knots and I'm like, yeah, I'm here to fly, the instructor has to say, no, we're not flying today. The instructor can't let me make that mistake because it's just going to be a disaster. So there are things where the instructor is going to step in and either say, no, we can't do that, or just grab the controls. And that happened an awful lot. I think learning to land, is one of the harder parts of learning to fly, as you might expect. And that was something that was really frustrating because you take off, and it takes a few minutes to kind of take off and then fly around the airport and get yourself all set up to land again. And you've done that a lot of times, and you're good at that. So that's not so hard, but it takes time. And then you get this like kind of almost like 20 seconds to actually do the landing part. And invariably something goes wrong. Something's different. The wind's different or set up a little bit different or something. There was some little distraction, something, and you're off. It doesn't feel right. Your instructor's telling you do this, do that. You're doing the other thing. And then at the last minute, the instructor kind of grabs the controls and kind of steps on the rudder and gets everything all lined up. And you have a hard but survivable landing. And then you're frustrated because you're like, I didn't land the plane. My instructor had to grab the controls. That was kind of frustrating. But then you have a conversation about it and you say, well, this is what you did. Did you see this? Did you see that? Did you do that? Did you see your airspeed was a little bit low here and then it sped up and then this and that. And so that, you weren't stabilized here. And you get that feedback and you're like, yeah, I saw that. I just didn't, I couldn't do it. It just didn't happen. I know what I did wrong. I don't know why. It's like, well, try it again. And then, it takes another 10, 15 minutes to, you got to taxi around, you got to take off again, you got to fly around, and then you get another 20 seconds to try this again. And then maybe you do it on your own and it's not the prettiest landing, but at least your instructor didn't touch the controls. And it's like, okay, that's great. But then the next time you do it, you can't do it. And so it's really frustrating. So terrible example to prove your point.
No, I'm glad that we stumbled into this plane example because I think it maybe hits on the right point that I wanted to get at, which is even if the struggle has to exist, it doesn't have to be catastrophic. And maybe the parallel of you with your flight instructor who's willing to take the handles when he needs to is the right metaphor to have in mind for like a teacher and a student, where the student's struggling in some way. And like at some point, the teacher should probably, come in there. They don't want to do it too early because you need to get some feel, but you can't do it too late because it's totally demotivating to the student and it messes with the mindset and they're thinking math is hard and I'm just never going to get this. So that might actually prove to be the most apt metaphor for the type of struggle that, like, I'm back on Team Eater now. I think you do need to struggle. But specifically the kinds of struggles that you do need to have, and then the kinds of struggles that don't have to exist are analogous to a plane crash or to non-productive struggle that Stenhaug was bringing up earlier.
Yeah, and I'm happy to be Team Stenhaug guy. I don't want Team Stenhaug to be a guy that says you don't need struggle at all. I'm really saying that I think struggling happens too often and is very often unproductive. And I think we can make educational experiences that take away those unproductive struggles. I think we need to do a better job of that.
Is it an apt metaphor, just because I'm loving metaphors this episode, to say that Team Stenhaug's point is you don't need plane crashes?
I'm not. So can we go very specific example? I'm not super comfortable all the way there. My first experience with Khan Academy is having my students in North Carolina use it and trying to go into a blended classroom. And at that point, I mean, this is a handful of years ago. I think the Khan Academy content's much worse at that point. But there was like a disconnect between a lot of the videos and exercises that wasn't at all obvious if you were watching as an expert, but was very problematic for my students. For example, Sal uses an example with positive numbers, and then the exercise has negative numbers, and students are just like either unfamiliar with negative numbers or just like kind of totally blown away by those. And
Yeah, you brought this up
I
before.
often I viewed that as being pretty unproductive. I think if they would have been scaffolded more carefully, if they would have done positive numbers, maybe Sal then says like, hey, here's how this happens with negative numbers. I think my students would have had a better overall experience. I think they just got thrown in the deep end as a result of kind of poor crafting of pedagogy on behalf of the content there. And I think it's like a little bit just, I don't know, like it's a little dismissive to just be like, oh, well, like we need struggles. So like the students should have to struggle through negative numbers there. Like that's just a cop out. Like, no, like someone had an oversight that like the video didn't include negative numbers and the exercise did. And my students paid the price there with like some unproductive class time where they were frustrated.
So the team Stenhaug point is that this is used as an excuse more often than it justifiably should be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it. Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm curious to hear Eater's response to that kind of thought, or the thought of excuse, and maybe even that specific example too.
Well, I'll start with a personal apology. I think I might have been responsible for some of the exercise scaffolding at that time.
Here, like most listeners might not know that there is like Eater was the one creating like exercises before, and like Stenhaug came in like a generation later as like
That's
other
hilarious.
content creators. So
That is
Stenhaug
like
came in to fix the mess that I made.
no one can possibly understand how funny that moment just was. All right, personal apology accepted, and apology for requiring that. Carry on.
No, that's amazing, because I mean, I clearly had no idea what I was doing at the time, and I knew it, which was fine. That's why we brought you in. We probably over-indexed on this unproductive struggle as being helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is helpful to have an experience like that at some point in your career. I don't think that it needs to be a part of every learning activity, and I think because of that, it's very easy to use it as an excuse to say, "Oh, well, you're
Mm-hmm.
struggling in a not productive way, but hey, that's life. So you can at least learn from that." I think that is a cop out if you're using it too much.
it sounds like we kind of agree that some kind of struggle is necessary. There exist a lot of unproductive ones out there, but we're centering on this. And Stenhaug, you opened up this entire thing by pointing out a certain hypocrisy between the last episode of me and Eater, bashing against lecturing as a model for teaching, and then creating videos that are basically lectures.
Mm-hmm.
And in some sense, I feel like there's another hypocrisy, not for Eater's case actually, but just for my channel, where if I'm sitting here and I'm talking about lectures, talking about struggle as being kind of this necessary component, but I deliberately try to make it as easy a flow as possible. I look over that script to try to make sure that there aren't mistakes. And I certainly am not like running into a mistake and then trying to deal with it live on screen in the videos themselves. And in that way, like, that's a failure. That's something that I don't teach by example. That's a genuine part of the math process. So to kind of circle things back, if you were consultants, your education channel consultants, and I come to you and I'm asking your service, I'm like, hey, I care about people learning from my videos. I really do. It's not just about entertainment. And there's a lot of components that go into that. And, from this whole conversation, I feel like we land on the idea that struggle is some part of that. There exists lots of needless struggle, but there will be hardships, and you want to show that fact to students. What would you do in my shoes? Would you change the video creation process?
I think the answer is maybe not on the mistakes necessarily. Like you want to address those specifically sometimes and include some percentage of them. And it seems like you do some percentage of them. I think just as far as like increasing learning, if you want to maximize on that, you create much shorter videos and then you design exercises with feedback that could go with it. And it can be really, really low technology exercises. It can be small problem sets, and then you create a video that attacks that. But it should really like extend from whatever kind of new insight you've shown with your initial video.
Yeah, my response would be the same, is that the videos that you have are not a complete curriculum. They're not a complete course. What I was thinking, I guess, before Stenhaug responded was that perhaps you could do a different style of video in addition to the videos you have that are sort of worked examples where you work through a problem and it's not scripted other than, I'm going to do this problem. You do it live and you kind of show what some of the struggle is. I think it's actually kind of one of the powerful things about Khan Academy, is you'll watch a calculus video and there's a worked problem and you realize that this calculus problem is like 10% calculus and 90% algebra, just to simplify the thing once you've done the 10% calculus. And I think that's a powerful thing to see if you're in a calculus class and you're confused that your homework seems to be mostly just like wrestling with these ugly expressions. It's a good example to see like, oh, okay, that's actually a normal part of what I'm here to do, of how to solve this type of problem. That's a piece of it. Although I definitely agree that creating materials or somehow enabling people to have access to materials that allow them to actually do the problems themselves and struggle with them and get feedback in some way is useful, which if your goal is to be a part of a complete curriculum, then
Part of a balanced breakfast over here.
part of a balanced breakfast, yeah,
I'm the orange juice on the side.
right. Then yeah, keep making the best orange juice you can.
Hello again, Grant here to close off the show for you. So don't forget, we have that episode number 4 that's also out, and it's a little bit of an experiment. It's just a totally random conversation that we happen to have after this recording. And I would love it if you would give a little feedback on to what extent you want us to incorporate aspects of that, that kind of casual, unplanned, kind of off-topic conversation into the main show, into the things that we're doing. I mean, admittedly, it's a little bit of a silly dichotomy, right? Because these episodes 2 and 3 are conversational. We do go off on tangents. I mean, on a spectrum of 1 to 10, 1 being literally just 3 dudes talking, no topic, and 10 being some journalistic effort where you're uncovering new facts. The only realm of doubt here is in that range of like 1 to 3. But I guess the question really is, to what extent should education be the topic of the podcast, right? Is Ben and Blue about education? Or would you prefer that just be one of several things that we happen to discuss? Because, I mean, I love education, right? This is an awesome topic to kind of delve deeper into. But at the same time, there's just a lot of neat personality quirks about Stenhaug and about Eder that you might otherwise not get to know. I mean, like here, it surfaced that Eder is a pilot. I bet not a lot of you knew that fact. And while I'm here making shameless requests of your time, if you do want more episodes, don't forget that there are actually a couple secret episodes on the Patreon that you can check out. A couple of very fun, definitely very different conversations that we had early on. And I have heard, I don't really know if this is true, but I've heard it's very helpful if a podcast that's just starting gets a meaningful number of iTunes reviews. So if that's true, maybe help us out by dropping a review over there. I mean, either way, I'd love to hear feedback. Data is great. So if you have the time and you're willing to let me make demands of it, you have your tasks. Check out the show notes for links.